The CEO walked in early and heard her whisper, "Don't say a word." What he saw left him breathless. The building was still half asleep when he arrived. No meetings, no reason to be there, but instinct, or fate, brought him in early. Through the glass wall of his office, he saw her, his assistant, whispering to someone who shouldn't be there. "Don't say a word," she breathed, and in that instant, everything changed. Before we continue, if you enjoy touching and inspiring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now, let's get back to the story. Don't say a word. Clara's whisper floated through the half-lit office, barely audible over the steady hum of the air conditioning, but Lucas heard it. Clear, sharp, and wrapped in a kind of urgency that didn't belong to a quiet Tuesday morning. He'd walked in earlier than usual, something he rarely did. No board meetings, no press interviews, just a gut feeling, a pull. And now, standing just outside his glass office, he wasn't sure if he'd stepped into someone else's story. Clara stood with her back to him, facing the large windows. She wasn't alone. Across from her, seated in his chair, Lucas Hawthorne's leather chair, was an elderly woman in a dusty pink cardigan, clutching a worn-out envelope with both hands like it might fall apart. Her white hair was pinned neatly, and her eyes flicked between Clara and the door. Neither of them had noticed him yet, but it was Clara's voice, low and tight, that kept his feet frozen in place. "Please, if they find out you were here, I could lose everything. Let me fix it first." She wasn't crying, but there was something trembling in her tone. Not fear exactly, something deeper, like the weight of years. Secrets, maybe, balancing right at the edge of exposure. Then Clara turned and saw him. The breath caught in her throat. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. She lowered her eyes, just for a second, and Lucas saw her hand subtly shift to hide the envelope from view. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said finally, her voice wrapped in the professional polish she always wore. "You're early." He didn't answer right away. There were very few things that made Lucas Hawthorne pause. This moment was one of them. Clara had arrived at 7:20 a.m., like always. She liked the quiet hum of the building before it officially woke up. The silence helped her think. She'd barely taken 2 sips of her coffee when the call came through the private line, a number she hadn't seen in almost a decade. She didn't answer at first, but it rang again and again. She knew before picking up that voice on the other end. "Clara, I need to see you, please, just for 5 minutes." She hadn't said yes, but somehow she found herself unlocking the building's side door, ushering the woman through before security made their rounds. The envelope had been in her hand the entire time. Clara didn't want to open it, not yet. She had built a life here, earned respect in a world that didn't hand it out easily to women like her. Every coffee fetched, every late-night email, every quiet success behind Lucas's signature, it had all led to this balance. Fragile, but hers. And now, one envelope, one woman, one whispered request not to say a word. Everything hung in that fragile pause. Lucas finally stepped forward, the silence dragging just a second longer than it should have. He looked at Clara, then at the woman in his chair. "I don't believe we've met," he said, his voice even but low. Clara's hand moved again, not quite shielding the envelope this time, but not offering it either. "This is Margaret," she said softly. "She's from before." There was something about the way Clara said it. A hesitation that hinted at chapters left unread. Lucas nodded. Slowly, but didn't press. Margaret stood, her eyes kind but flickering with unease. "I shouldn't have come. I didn't know who else to talk to. I didn't mean to cause trouble." She placed the envelope on the edge of the desk, her hand lingering on it like she was afraid to let go. "I'll go," she whispered. "Clara, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing." Before either of them could stop her, she walked out, quietly, with dignity, but something about her shoulders told Lucas this woman was leaving far more behind than just an envelope. Neither Clara nor Lucas moved for a long moment after the door closed. Finally, Clara exhaled, her shoulders slumping just slightly. "I didn't expect you this early." "I noticed," Lucas replied, stepping behind his desk. "Is there a reason a stranger was sitting in my chair discussing what sounded very much like a secret?" Clara stayed still. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, changing the subject the way a woman does when she's not ready to break. "I would, but I'd like the truth more." Still, she disappeared for a moment and returned with 2 mugs, one dark roast, no sugar, just the way he liked it. Lucas studied her as she set the cup down. Her hands were steady, but her eyes... Not today. Today, her eyes betrayed her. "She's from my past," Clara said at last. "Someone who kept a secret for me, until now." Lucas didn't speak. He just waited. "Nothing illegal," she added quickly, "but personal and potentially embarrassing. I thought it was buried." Lucas lifted the cup. "Buried things have a way of digging themselves out at the worst times." Clara smiled faintly. "That sounds like something my grandmother would have said." That was the first moment he saw her relax, just a little. The moment passed. The envelope remained untouched on the edge of the desk. Lucas reached for it. Clara didn't stop him. Inside there was a photograph, faded but clear. A small child. Maybe 5 years old, holding Clara's hand. Her hair was longer then, tied back in a simple braid. She looked tired, but she was smiling. A real smile. Not the polite kind she wore now. Behind them, barely in focus, stood a man in a gray uniform, police or security, his arm on Clara's shoulder. Lucas looked up. "That's my niece," Clara said, her voice soft. "But at the time, everyone thought she was mine." She took a breath, steadying herself. "My sister left, just left. Dropped her off on my doorstep and disappeared. I was 20, still in school. That photo, it was taken the day they tried to remove her from me. Said I wasn't fit. Margaret was the social worker who fought to keep her with me, unofficially, off the record." Lucas leaned back, the weight of the story hitting him in pieces. "And now?" "She's grown, in college, doing well. But someone's threatening to release this photo to the media, spin a different story. Say I lied, that I have a secret child, that I'm not who I say I am." She folded her arms. "And the worst part? They're right. I do have secrets, but not for the reasons they think." Lucas stood. He crossed the room slowly, then paused by the window, the same one Clara had stared out of just minutes ago. Then, without turning, he asked, "Who sent the threat?" Clara hesitated. Then, just one name, Beatrice. Lucas turned sharply. Beatrice Morrow, head of PR, polished, calculated, and as Clara once described in a late-night slip of tongue, "The kind of woman who makes you feel overdressed in your own skin." A silence bloomed between them. And just before Lucas could respond, his office phone rang. Line 1, "Beatrice." And on the screen, "I have something you need to see, urgently." Lucas didn't pick up the phone. He stared at the blinking light on line 1, Beatrice Morrow's private extension, until it stopped. 4 rings, then silence. Not even a voicemail. Behind him, Clara didn't move. She knew better than to interrupt the quiet. And Lucas? He was still processing the name she'd just spoken like a confession she hadn't meant to say out loud. "Beatrice sent the photo," he asked finally, turning slowly. Clara nodded once. "Not directly," she added. "But yes, it came from her office, unmarked envelope, no return name, but she made it clear, in other ways." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Why now?" "I think she's positioning herself to replace me." Clara's voice remained calm, but the tiniest twitch in her eye betrayed something sharper beneath. "Or at least make sure I'm no longer close enough to hear things." Lucas arched a brow. "What would she be worried you might hear?" That was the moment Clara went quiet again, lips parted, but no sound. There was a dance in her head now, loyalty to the truth versus loyalty to people who didn't deserve it. "I've been in this building long enough to know," she said eventually, "that when someone like Beatrice stops smiling, someone else starts bleeding." Lucas almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly right. Beatrice Morrow had been with the company for 9 years, head of PR, charismatic, brilliant, and dangerous in heels. She and Lucas had history, not romantic, but strategic. They had built the company's public image together after the founder's sudden death. She'd protected him from scandals. He'd given her access. It was a mutual power that made other departments whisper, but there was always a third presence in the room, even when it wasn't acknowledged. Clara, the assistant who never raised her voice, never overstepped, never had anything more than a mug in her hand, and yet knew more about Lucas's schedule, stress levels, and silent tells than Beatrice ever would. That's what made Clara dangerous, and Beatrice knew it. Lucas leaned against the window. "You know what she's going to say," Clara murmured, as he ran a hand through his hair. "She'll act like she's trying to help, that she's worried about optics, that this story, could damage your reputation." Lucas met her gaze. "And what's the truth?" "She wants me out," Clara said simply, "and she's using a child's photo to do it." Lucas didn't say anything, but he walked across the office, picked up the envelope, and slipped the photo back inside, folding the flap with quiet precision. Then very gently he handed it back to Clara. "Keep it, with you." Clara's hand brushed his, the lightest contact, and in that moment, something shifted. The distance between assistant and CEO cracked by a breath. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucas didn't reply. He just took his coffee, now lukewarm, and sipped. An hour later, Beatrice called for an emergency PR sync in the executive boardroom. Lucas arrived 5 minutes late, deliberately, and Clara trailed in behind him with her notepad and the envelope tucked inside her satchel. She said nothing, as always, and took her usual seat along the edge of the room. Beatrice was already standing. "Lucas," she said, smiling, "I've been trying to reach you. Something's come up, something delicate." She laid a manila folder on the table and opened it, revealing the same photo Lucas had just seen. Clara went still. Her pulse picked up, but her face stayed calm. "I was contacted anonymously," Beatrice said, glancing at Lucas, then at Clara. "This image has been circulating privately. If it reaches the press, well, you can imagine the narrative." Lucas sat slowly, folding his arms. "And what narrative is that, Beatrice?" Beatrice blinked, caught, but too well trained to flinch. "That you're employing someone with a history of dishonesty," she said, now with quiet regret in her voice. "That someone close to you may have misrepresented their background, and that it could reflect badly on our leadership integrity." Clara felt her chest tighten. She'd survived tougher battles, but this one was polished, delivered in a whisper, coated in concern. She didn't know whether to cry or applaud. "Clara," Beatrice added, turning now, voice low and sweet, "no one's judging you, but the press won't be so kind. If you'd prefer to step back, take a leave perhaps, I'd be happy to issue a discreet statement." Lucas raised a brow. Discreet? That would imply something shameful. Beatrice smiled tightly. It would be for her protection, of course. Lucas glanced at Clara. And then, in one of those rare moments when he broke character, he asked her a question in front of everyone. "Do you want to say anything?" Clara looked up. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. She was the assistant. The quiet one, the one who scheduled coffee and typed minutes and picked up dry cleaning on her way in. But now? Now her voice mattered. So she stood. "I raised my niece when no one else would," she said simply, calmly. "I lied to protect her. I'd do it again." Silence, no apology, no drama, just truth. Drama. And it landed in that room like a stone in still water. Lucas's eyes didn't leave hers, but Beatrice, for the first time in years, didn't have a comeback. Clara sat back down. She didn't tremble. Lucas turned to Beatrice. "We won't be releasing a statement, not now, not ever. But if this photo leaks," Lucas continued, voice sharper now, "we'll sue for defamation. The company will back Clara fully. That's the statement." Beatrice froze. The meeting ended early. Later that evening, Clara returned to her desk to grab her things. On her chair sat a single item, a rose gold locket. She picked it up gently. The chain was thin. Elegant! Inside, tucked behind the tiny glass panel, was a folded note. "Your secrets are safe. For now. B." Clara's hands went cold, not because of the message, but because of the locket itself. It wasn't new. It was hers. Lost 10 years ago in a train station bathroom. She turned it over, and there, just beneath the clasp, was the tiny scratch she remembered making when she was 18. Beatrice hadn't found the photo. She'd been holding on to it for a decade. She'd found it years ago, back when Clara was still invisible. Another overworked assistant no one noticed, and she'd kept it, waiting for the day it would matter. The office was nearly dark when Lucas noticed her light still on. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. Rain tapped quietly against the tall glass windows, soft and rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock running out of patience. He didn't knock, just opened her door gently, leaned one shoulder against the frame. "You're still here?" Clara looked up from her screen, startled, but not surprised. Her hair had loosened from its neat pin, and she'd changed into her glasses, the ones she only wore when she thought no one important would see. "I could say the same about you," she said, half smiling. "I live here," he replied. "You don't." She closed the laptop softly. Her fingers lingered on the lid. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I might as well catch up on the week's minutes." Lucas stepped inside, closing the door behind him. That simple movement, quiet, slow, shifted the room. Suddenly, it wasn't assistant and CEO. It was Clara and Lucas. Two people, no titles, no polished smiles, just whatever was left underneath. "I haven't eaten?" Lucas said after a beat. "Have you?" Clara hesitated, then shook her head. "I was too focused. Forgot." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small paper bag. It looked slightly crushed, like it had been sitting in his briefcase all day. "Grilled cheese," he said, "from Marta's. She still makes it the way she used to." Clara blinked. "Marta's Deli? That place closed?" Lucas interrupted, almost proud. "She still takes phone orders, just not for everyone." He handed her half, unwrapped in a clean napkin. Clara took it slowly. The first bite was warm. But it was more than that. It was nostalgia, simplicity, a memory of a life before everything got complicated. She smiled. "It tastes like Saturdays." Lucas looked at her. She had never seemed more real to him than in that moment, holding a messy sandwich with her sleeves rolled up, a tiny dot of cheese near her lip she hadn't noticed. She laughed quietly. "What?" "You've got mustard on your tie," she said, pointing. He looked down. She was right. It was barely visible, but there. Lucas groaned. Of course. The power suit falls to condiments. Clara smiled again, and this time it wasn't polite or tired. It was effortless. "I used to come here at night," she said suddenly. "When I first got hired, I'd sit at that same desk, terrified I'd mess everything up." Lucas leaned back, letting her speak. "I didn't come from this world," she continued. "Everyone else had connections, fancy last names. I just worked hard, said yes to everything, stayed late, never spoke up." He nodded. "I remember." She glanced at him. "You do?" "You made the perfect coffee from day one," he said. "And you always took your lunch break exactly 9 minutes late, every single time." Clara blinked, surprised. Lucas shrugged. "I notice more than people think." She looked down at her lap, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. It wasn't about the job, she said. I just needed a place that didn't fall apart. Lucas tilted his head, studying her. Home was that bad? She didn't answer at first, then, barely above a whisper, worse. And for the first time in their years working together, Lucas didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer advice. He just sat there with her. And that silence, warm, unhurried, meant more than any carefully crafted words ever could. Her fingers drifted to her bag. She pulled the rose-gold locket out and turned it slowly in her hand. Lucas noticed immediately. Pretty, he said. Is it new? No, she answered. It's old, lost, and somehow found its way back. He waited. Clara hesitated, then opened it. Inside, the photo was gone. In its place was a folded note she hadn't yet opened. She paused, then slowly peeled it open. Her eyes scanned it, and her lips parted. Lucas sat forward. What is it? Clara handed it to him. Just one line, written in tiny, precise print. I'm not your enemy, but I could be. I can be. Lucas's expression darkened. She's escalating. Clara nodded, slipping the locket closed. I don't understand what she wants. She has the power, the title, the corner office. Why keep pushing? Lucas folded the note slowly. Because you're in the one place she can't reach, he said. Clara tilted her head. And where's that? His voice was low, calm, certain. Right next to me. The rain had stopped, but the storm between them hadn't. Lucas stood reaching for his coat, but instead of leaving, he paused near her chair. Just close enough for her to feel the shift in the air. Clara, he said, voice barely above a breath, if she keeps pushing, if it all comes out, will you let me protect you? She looked up, startled, uncertain. I don't need saving, she said quietly. He leaned closer. I didn't say you did. Then, as if catching himself, he straightened, buttoned his coat, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. Good night. And then he left. But Clara didn't move, because her heart was still back in that moment, between the whisper and the walk away. The next morning the sun returned with unusual brightness, sharp, almost accusatory, as if it had missed something juicy the day before and now wanted in on the gossip. Clara stepped off the elevator, her blouse still damp from the leftover mist, her heels silent on the marble floor. She clutched her bag tightly, not because it was heavy, but because the locket was inside. The message still echoed in her mind. I'm not your enemy, but I could be. Beatrice had always been dangerous in theory, but now she was playing chess. And Clara knew exactly where she stood on the board, one square away from checkmate. The next day things felt deceptively calm, the kind of calm that hides new storms. By 11:45 a.m., Clara was reviewing quarterly reports when her work phone buzzed. Lucas. Lunch? Not a meeting, just lunch. She hesitated. Clara. Where? Lucas. The cafe on level 32, window booth. Her heart thumped. Once, hard, like it was checking to see if she was still listening. Level 32 was a full-glass cafe, reserved for clients and execs. It was where handshakes turned into mergers and smiles often had sharp teeth. Assistants rarely ate there, and certainly not in booths with the CEO. She arrived 5 minutes late, unsure if that made her look casual or terrified. Lucas stood as she approached, always the gentleman, even in a tailored cobalt suit that probably cost more than her rent. Here you came, he said, sliding a menu toward her. You asked, she replied, smoothing her blouse. The waiter arrived. Silent, professional, familiar. Lucas ordered without looking at the menu. Roasted tomato bisque and grilled focaccia with olives and rosemary. Clara followed his lead. The first sip of soup warmed her in a way the cafe's giant windows couldn't. They spoke lightly at first, about the weekend weather, about a supplier who sent 6 branded pens with the wrong logo, but Clara felt it, eyes, on them. From across the cafe, corner booths, elevator glass reflections, someone pretending to scroll their phone while angling it toward them. Beatrice wasn't there, but her presence? Absolutely. "I think we've been noticed," Clara murmured, trying not to look around. Lucas stirred his soup slowly. "Let them." Her brows lifted slightly. "That's not like you," he shrugged. "You've spent years protecting my image. Maybe it's time I protect yours." She smiled faintly. "That sounds dangerously like kindness." Lucas's gaze locked with hers. "It's not kindness." That hung in the air a second too long. Their waiter returned to top off Clara's water. But as he reached for the glass, his elbow caught her coffee mug, which toppled with an almost comical clatter onto the marble table. Hot espresso splashed across Lucas's lap. Clara gasped. "Oh my God!" Lucas stood abruptly, grabbing the linen napkin, trying to pat his trousers, with an expression somewhere between horror and amusement. The waiter stammered an apology. Clara offered her own, flustered. I swear, I've never spilled anything in my life." Lucas let out a breath and, to her complete shock, laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite huff, a real deep laugh. "It's fine," he said, looking down at the spreading stain. "At least it's not mustard again." Clara covered her mouth, half mortified, half snickering. People were definitely watching now, but the tension had cracked, and inside it, something human and warm peeked through. Back in her office an hour later, Clara opened her email to find a message without a subject line. From a burner address, just one sentence. "One lunch, and you think you've won?" No name. But Clara knew the voice behind it, and this time she didn't feel fear. She felt something colder, anger. She walked straight to Beatrice's office. Didn't knock. Beatrice was seated at her desk, reviewing press drafts, framed in sunlight, perfectly poised as always. "Clara," she said without looking up, "to what do I owe this bold entrance?" Clara stepped closer, just one pace too far for comfort. "I know it was you." Beatrice finally looked up, her smile tight. "You'll have to be more specific, darling. The locket, the photo, the email just now. This isn't a game." "Oh," Beatrice said, still calm, "but it is. You're just late to the rules." Clara stood straighter. "I won't be intimidated." Beatrice leaned back slowly. "You will. Eventually. You'll realize that proximity doesn't equal permanence. People like Lucas, they don't choose girls like you. They just borrow them. For a while." Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out the locket, and placed it carefully on Beatrice's desk. "Then maybe you should keep this, since it seems you've grown so attached." Then she turned and walked out. As Clara reached the doorway, Beatrice's assistant brushed past her with a file. The contact was barely there. Quick, practiced. Minutes later, Clara would realize what that brush had delivered, the weight of the rose gold locket. Quietly slipped back into her coat pocket. That evening, Clara was leaving through the west elevator, the one most staff never used, when the doors opened. Lucas stood inside, alone. He looked up, surprised, then relieved. They didn't speak as she stepped in. The doors closed. The silence was electric. Then, just before the 14th floor, the elevator jolted, not stopped, but hesitated. Lights flickered. A faint metallic click touched the floor, too soft to notice over the hum, as the rose gold locket slipped from Clara's coat and came to rest by the panel. Lucas instinctively reached for the controls. Clara steadied herself against the wall. It was nothing, but in that brief breath of darkness, her shoulder brushed his chest. When the lights returned, they didn't step back. Lucas looked down. Clara looked up, and in that half moment between breath and decision, he whispered, "Are you sure this is just a job to you?" The elevator ride continued in silence after Lucas asked the question. "Are you sure this is just a job to you?" Clara didn't answer. Not because she didn't know how, but because the answer scared her more than the question. By the time they reached the lobby, the space between them had returned. Her posture had straightened. His gaze had cooled. Whatever almost happened, hadn't. They stepped out, side by side, but not together, and for once she was grateful for the city noise, because it gave her an excuse not to speak. It had started drizzling again. Lucas turned up the collar of his coat. Clara clutched her umbrella tighter, though she didn't open it. Not yet. They walked toward the subway in step, quiet rhythm, matching strides, and reached the crosswalk just as the light turned red. He finally broke the silence. "You didn't answer me." Clara stared straight ahead. "I know." "Why?" She took a breath. "You're not used to people not answering you, are you?" Lucas almost smiled. "No, I'm not." The rain picked up. The buff-horse. Clara finally opened her umbrella, a plain navy one with a tiny tear in the corner. He didn't carry one. Without thinking, she tilted it slightly toward him. "I'm not playing games," he said softly, eyes fixed on the traffic. "This isn't casual for me." "That's exactly why I didn't answer," she murmured. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw something different in her now. Not coldness, fear. They reached the corner where paths diverged. Lucas stopped. "Coffee?" he asked. "And just somewhere off the grid. No phones, no staff, just us." Clara hesitated, long enough for the rain to hit her shoes. Then nodded once. He led her 2 blocks north to a small, nearly invisible shop tucked behind a florist's stall. A bell jingled when they walked in, warm, familiar, the kind of place where tables didn't match and mugs came chipped. They sat in the far corner, no window views, just the scent of cinnamon and ground espresso. The waitress brought 2 mugs without asking for an order. "She remembers your usual," Clara said. Lucas shrugged. "I used to come here, before the suits, before the pressure." Clara traced the rim of her mug with her thumb. "It suits you, the pressure." He tilted his head. "You think so?" "You carry it like it was always yours." He paused. "You don't." She looked up, caught off guard. "You carry it like a shield," he added, "like it's the only thing keeping you upright." Clara stared down at the steam. "You know how everyone thinks I'm unshakable?" she said after a pause. Lucas didn't answer. He knew better. "When I was 22, I fell for someone. Hard. He was older, smart, gentle in public, sharp in private, told me everything I wanted to hear until I stopped being useful to him." Lucas leaned forward, listening, not interrupting. "He borrowed money, promised he'd pay me back, left me with debt I couldn't explain and a niece I was barely managing to raise." She smiled bitterly. "My credit was ruined. I took jobs no one else wanted. Started working nights, then mornings. I built myself back up with duct tape and coffee spoons." Lucas's expression darkened, not with pity, but something sharper, protective. "He ever come back?" "No," Clara said, "but he didn't have to. The shame stayed." Silence stretched. And then, with a soft, almost surprised laugh, she added, "You know what the worst part was?" Lucas looked at her gently. "I still missed him, for a long time. Even after all the damage. Isn't that pathetic?" "No," he said simply. "It's human." The waitress brought 2 small plates, ginger cookies, warm from the oven. "On the house," she said with a wink. "You both looked like you needed a bit of sugar." Clara broke hers in half and handed the piece across the table. Lucas took it, surprised. "Is this a peace offering?" "No," she replied. "It's me saying thank you for not looking at me like I'm broken." He chewed slowly, then smiled. Truly smiled. "I never thought you were." She met his gaze. For once, she didn't look away. When they stood to leave, Clara reached into her coat pocket for her gloves and felt something cold. The locket. She hadn't taken it back. Yet here it was again. Not lost. Returned. Someone had slipped it into her coat before she left Beatrice's office. A folded note inside. Lucas saw her pause. "What is it?" Clara opened it slowly. you're not the only one who knows how to play the long game. B. She folded it with trembling fingers. Lucas saw the shift in her face, the fire behind the fear. She's not going to stop, is she? She asked quietly. No, he said, but neither am I. They walked out into the cold again. At the corner where their paths split, they both stopped. Lucas hesitated, then reached for her hand. Clara froze, but didn't pull away. His thumb grazed hers. Barely there, just a whisper of touch. I know you've built walls, he said softly. I don't want to tear them down, just walk beside them if you'll let me. Clara didn't answer, but her fingers curled slightly, almost invisibly, into his, just enough. The first brick shifted. It started with a whisper. By 9 a.m., Clara could feel it, something off in the air, not loud. Not cruel, just subtle shifts. Co-workers who always said good morning didn't. A junior assistant who usually greeted her with a smile looked away. Then at 9:47 a.m., she opened her inbox. There it was. Subject line. Regarding your past. Clarification requested an internal HR memo. Polite. Cold. Forwarded to all department heads. Attached was the photo, the one of her holding her niece's hand. Framed carefully in a formal context, recently surfaced image prompts review of prior disclosures regarding employee history. No sender name. But Clara didn't need one. She felt her stomach drop. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, quietly folded the email, and walked down the hall. Within hours, the leak was contained, quietly buried by the same PR team that once tried to weaponize it. They called it the fishbowl. A full-glass conference room where big decisions happened, and everyone could see in, even if they couldn't hear. Lucas was already inside, flanked by the legal lead, 2 board advisors, and Beatrice, seated gracefully at his right. Clara stepped in without knocking. The entire room turned. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. Miss Whitmore, she said, smooth as silk, I didn't expect you. I know, Clara replied, and closed the glass door behind her. The silence was sharp. Lucas stood slowly. Clara, she held up a hand. Let me speak. And to his surprise, he sat back down. I've worked here for 7 years, Clara began, and in all that time, I've never once brought my personal life into this office. Beatrice opened her mouth, but Clara didn't look at her. She looked at the board. At age 20, I became the only guardian for a child I didn't give birth to. I raised her, alone. I took 3 jobs. I paid off someone else's debts. And I built a life here, in this building, based on discipline, integrity, and silence. Because I thought if I stayed small, no one would look too closely. Her eyes landed on the photo sitting on the table. But here's the thing about staying quiet. People start filling in your silence with their own stories. Lucas watched her, eyes unwavering. I am not ashamed of this photo, she said, lifting it gently, her hand steady. I'm proud of what it took to survive it. The room held its breath. Even Beatrice said nothing. Lucas stood again, but this time he didn't hide behind legal phrasing or polite executive tone. He spoke like a man who had made a decision. For the record, he said, Clara has always disclosed everything that matters. Her loyalty, her work ethic, her character, those are facts, not opinions. Beatrice shifted in her chair. Lucas continued, turning toward the advisors. If this company wants to question someone's place here, let's start with the ones who use personal pain as professional leverage. He didn't look at Beatrice directly. He didn't need to. The message landed. After the meeting ended, Clara stepped out first. She walked past the glass walls, back straight, eyes ahead. And this time, no one looked away. No one whispered. Because the room she'd just walked out of, she owned it. Lucas found her an hour later on the rooftop terrace, a quiet place most people forgot existed. She was sitting on the wooden bench near the edge, coat pulled tight around her, coffee in hand. He approached slowly. She didn't turn. "Thank you," she said softly, "for what you said." He sat beside her. "You didn't need me to say it." "I did," she admitted, "but only because I didn't think I could say it myself." Lucas looked out over the skyline. "Beatrice won't stop. You know that, right?" Clara nodded. "But I'm not scared anymore." She reached into her coat, pulled out the locket. "I was going to throw this off the roof," she said, rolling it in her hand. "But maybe I'll keep it. Let it remind me how far I've come." Lucas smiled slightly. "Then let me give it a new memory." Clara turned to him, puzzled. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a tiny folded photo. It was them, taken accidentally that day at the cafe. Blurry, but real. He'd printed it quietly that morning. "I thought it was time someone saw you the way I do." Clara stared at it, speechless. Lucas stood to leave. "I'll see you downstairs," he said gently. But before walking away, he looked back and added, "Unless you want to walk out with me." Clara stared at the locket, then the photo, then the man, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she had to walk alone. Clara always left the office by 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. No one knew why. Lucas never asked, but he noticed, and tonight, as she stepped out of the building into the cooling October air, her pace softened, not from fatigue, but from something closer to relief. It was their night. The hallway smelled like cinnamon and textbooks. Clara knocked once, waited, then used the spare key. She could hear music playing softly from the other side. Inside, the apartment was a warm mess. Notebooks scattered across the couch, a mug half full on the coffee table, laundry not yet folded. But Clara smiled, because there, in pajama pants and an oversized hoodie, stood the girl who had changed everything. "Hey, stranger," said the young woman, pulling her into a hug. "You're late." "I was making headlines," Clara said dryly. "Didn't you check your email?" Her niece pulled back and grinned. "I live off campus, remember? I'm practically off the grid." Clara exhaled, tension fading with every step deeper into the room. This was home, not by walls but by presence. June Whitmore, now 21, studying journalism, brilliant, stubborn, and far too wise for her age. They sat on the floor, legs crossed over a shared blanket, 2 bowls of homemade lentil stew between them. Clara's recipe, still barely improved after all these years. "Don't get fancy on me," June warned, as Clara sprinkled parsley over her bowl. "It's not fancy," Clara said. "It's grown up." "Parsley is suspicious." Clara laughed, and for the first time in days, it reached her eyes. "I need to tell you something," Clara said gently. Setting down her spoon, June leaned in. "Uh-oh, did you finally join Instagram?" Clara rolled her eyes. "Worse, someone leaked our photo." June blinked. "That photo?" Clara nodded. "The one from the courthouse. You holding my hand, me trying not to cry." June frowned. "But that was over a decade ago. Why now?" "Politics," Clara said softly. "Office politics." June sat back. "Do they think I'm your secret daughter?" Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. June looked down, quiet for a long time. Then, with a dry laugh, she whispered, "We've been called worse." Clara reached into her coat and pulled out the locket. She turned it over in her hand, warm now from her touch, then placed it in June's palm. "You used to play with this when you were little," she said. "You'd open and close it 100 times a day." June smiled faintly. "I liked the sound it made." "I want you to have it," June blinked. "Clara!" "I kept it for too long," Clara said. "As a reminder of everything I lost. But I think now, maybe it should be about what I saved." June opened the locket. Inside was a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly, read the tiny script, and tears sprang to her eyes. "You were the reason I stayed." They hugged, tight, long, unspoken. Clara rested her chin on June's shoulder and closed her eyes. "I just didn't want you to ever feel ashamed," Clara said quietly. June pulled back, eyes fierce now. "I'm proud of you, always. You didn't just raise me, you showed me what it looks like to fight quietly, to survive with grace." Clara blinked hard. The years she'd carried alone suddenly felt lighter. Later, after June had dozed off on the couch, Clara stepped outside to call a car. The building's front stoop was dimly lit, quiet. She spoke softly into the phone. "I think I'm falling for him," she said, a pause. "I don't want to. I shouldn't. It's complicated, but when he looks at me, I feel like I'm not invisible anymore." She stopped, then added, "But I don't know if he sees me, or just what I represent." From across the street, in the shadow of a small alley, Lucas stood motionless. He hadn't meant to overhear, but now he had, and everything inside him shifted. Because for the first time since he'd met her, he realized he wasn't the only one falling. Lucas hadn't meant to follow her that night, but when he saw Clara walk out of the building, locket in hand, phone pressed to her ear, something in him tightened, and when he heard her whisper those words, "I think I'm falling for him," it hit him like a second heartbeat. He stood in the shadow, unmoving, listening with a guilt he didn't fully regret. Because now he knew the truth. She wasn't unreachable. She was just afraid of being misunderstood. Clara arrived early, earlier than usual. She was in by 7:15, hair still damp from her shower, blouse neatly pressed, locket absent. She felt clear-eyed for the first time in weeks. And, strangely, fragile. She didn't see Lucas all morning. No texts, no meetings, not even a hello. By noon she told herself it didn't matter. By 2, she knew she was lying. At 4:17 p.m., a sticky note was placed on her desk. It wasn't typed. It wasn't emailed. It was in Lucas's handwriting, strong, slanted, unmistakably his. Rooftop, 5 sharp. L. She stared at it, then flipped it over. Nothing on the back, just a direction and a choice. The wind was stronger this time. The sun hovered low, casting long shadows across the wooden planks. Lucas was already there. No coat, just shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands resting in his pockets. Clara stepped onto the terrace and closed the door behind her. He turned. Their eyes met, and everything slowed. "I heard you," he said quietly. Clara's heart skipped. "I was across the street." "Last night." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Of course you were." Lucas stepped closer, but not too close. "I didn't plan it. I needed to know." Clara's voice wavered. "And now that you do?" Lucas studied her face, the lines beneath her eyes, the strength in her chin, the way she was holding her breath like a woman about to lose everything. "You don't represent anything to me," he said. She blinked. He took another step. "You're not a symbol, or an assistant, or a complication I'm trying to manage." He paused, voice lower now. "You're a person I see every day, even when you think I'm not looking." Clara's voice cracked slightly. "Then why didn't you say something sooner?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I'm a man with power," he said, "and you're a woman who's earned everything with dignity. I didn't want to touch that, not unless you reached back." Tears stung her eyes, not because she was weak, but because for once someone had understood her silence completely. Lucas reached into his pocket, pulled out something wrapped in a soft cloth. He unwrapped it slowly. The locket. Clara gasped softly. "How?" "I found it by the elevator panel after that jolt last night. You must have dropped it." She took it back, fingers trembling. Then opened it. The tiny paper was still inside. But now there was something new. Tucked behind the note was his business card, but not the usual one. It had a handwritten line added in ink. "In case you ever want to be more than what the world sees you as." She looked up at him, shocked, moved. "Are you offering me a promotion?" she whispered, half teasing, half broken. He smiled gently. "No, I'm offering you a choice." They stood in the wind. Nothing between them now. Not power, not fear, not the past. Just a choice. Lucas stepped closer, close enough for his hand to brush hers. "I want you in my life, Clara," he said quietly. "Not beside me, not behind me, with me." Her eyes shimmered. "But I need to know," he continued. "Are you ready to stop hiding?" She hesitated, then took his hand, just barely, just enough. And as their fingers threaded together, soft, slow, sure, a voice echoed from behind them. "Well, isn't this convenient?" They turned, Beatrice, framed in the glass doorway. Arms folded, eyes cold. "I always suspected," she said, stepping onto the rooftop, "but I never thought you'd be so careless." And with a tiny smile, she held up her phone. Recording. Beatrice's heels clicked once, then again across the rooftop. The sound was deliberate, a warning shot. She held her phone steady. The screen still glowing. "You might want to think twice about what happens next," she said calmly. "The board reviews begin next week. A recording like this, romantic involvement between a CEO and his assistant, especially unreported?" Her eyes flicked to Clara. "Professional suicide for both of you." Lucas didn't flinch. "Delete it," Beatrice smiled. "Not how this works. Not anymore." She turned, poised, smug, and walked back through the glass doors, leaving behind the chilling echo of her threat. Clara stood frozen, her fingers still laced with Lucas's. Only now the moment felt different, not private, not tender. Exposed. Lucas looked at her. "We don't need to hide." Clara shook her head slowly, her voice small. "It's not about shame, it's about survival. You survived worse." "But you didn't," she whispered. "Your reputation has never been questioned. I won't be the reason it starts now." Lucas stepped in front of her. "Then let me be the reason it survives." By morning, the video had been sent, not to the media, but to the board's internal ethics panel. Anonymous source. No comments, just the footage. But Lucas acted first. He had told her, that morning. She didn't protest, only asked him to spell her name right. He walked into the boardroom, sharp navy suit, shoulders squared, calm fury in his stride, and handed over a formal document, a transparency declaration. Signed, dated, clear. A personal relationship with Assistant Director Clara Whitmore has recently emerged. All relevant ethical standards are being observed. No promotions, bonuses, or favors have been exchanged. I take full responsibility for maintaining the integrity of our corporate conduct and communications. Gasps, stirring. Beatrice tried to speak, but Lucas raised a hand. "Any further attempts to weaponize my personal life," he said calmly, "will be met with legal action, internally or externally." He turned to the room. "I value my reputation, but I value my conscience more." Silence. No one dared challenge him. But Clara wasn't in the room. She was downstairs, in her office, holding the locket again, this time not with fear, but with weight. The photo Lucas had tucked inside had worn soft around the edges. She traced it with her thumb. She should feel proud. She should feel defended. But all she felt was exposed. A knock on her door. It opened softly. Marta, Senior Finance Director, smart, direct. One of the longest-standing voices in the company, respected by all. "I heard," Marta said, "about the video, the board." Clara straightened, bracing herself. But Marta walked in, closed the door, and sat. "Just wanted to say," she added, "if you think for a second anyone here doubts who you are, you're wrong." Clara blinked. Marta continued, "You've been the spine of this place for years." Quietly, gracefully. "If anyone deserves something real, it's you. Don't let fear dress up as sacrifice." Then she stood, nodded once, and left. Clara stared at the door. Her heart trembled in a way that wasn't fear, but permission. Permission to believe, maybe, just maybe, she was more than someone surviving quietly. Maybe she was someone worth standing for. That evening, the elevator opened on the executive floor. Lucas stepped out. Clara was waiting near the windows, her coat folded in her arms, the locket around her neck visible. Their eyes met. She walked toward him slowly, then paused. "I have a question," she said quietly. He nodded once. "If I walked away from all this," she said, eyes locked on his, "from the title, the office, the silence, would you come with me?" Lucas didn't speak, didn't move. Clara's voice cracked. "Because I don't want to be a woman you protect. I want to be a woman you choose, even without the war." Then she took one step back and waited. Clara didn't wait for Lucas's answer, not out of pride, but because waiting, for her, had always meant hoping for someone else to take the lead. And this time, she was done waiting. She took the elevator down, coat over her arm, dignity intact, heart trembling, but upright, not at first, not through the lobby, not through the revolving doors where the city wind curled around her, sharp and cold. But he did follow, not in a rush, not in panic, but with quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't shout across a room, but arrives when it matters. Clara's old apartment was tucked between two brownstones in the quieter end of Queens. She hadn't lived there in years, but she kept it, paid the taxes, visited every month, kept the curtains drawn and the windows clean. It was the place she'd raised June, where she'd stitched her life together with discount groceries, secondhand furniture, and the kind of love no paycheck can buy. Lucas arrived just after sunset. She opened the door before he knocked. No makeup, hair tied back, no heels, just Clara. He stepped into the hallway, warm with lamplight, walls lined with books, photographs of a younger Clara and a laughing child, barely 5. He turned slowly, taking it all in. "This is where it all began?" he asked softly. Clara nodded. "This is where I learned how to breathe again." She'd made soup. Simple lentil. No garnish this time. 2 bowls, a chipped mug of tea, no music, no wine, no pressure. Just a man and a woman at a modest kitchen table that had seen more truth than any boardroom. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then she said it. Not as a challenge, but a truth. "If you want to know me, Lucas, this is where I live." He looked up. "I don't mean the address," she added. "I mean this life, this version. No driver, no polished glass tower, just me, unremarkable, messy, real." He wiped his mouth gently. "You think I don't want real?" She held his gaze. "I think you've never had to choose it before." After dinner, she placed the locket on the table, open, the photo inside, still them from the cafe, the slip of paper now replaced with something handwritten in Clara's own script. "See me, and stay." Lucas stared at it, then reached forward, closed it gently, not to dismiss it, but to hold it, and then he put it in his pocket. Clara's breath caught. "You're keeping it?" He looked at her. "For now, until I've earned it." She stood and walked toward the bookshelf, her fingers brushing over the spines. "This place saw the worst of me," she said. "The nights I cried into a pillow because I couldn't pay the heating bill. The mornings I gave June my half of the cereal and lied that I'd already eaten." Lucas stood behind her now, close. "I want to know all of it," he said. Clara turned to face him, slowly. "Like it cost something. You say that now, but when the shine wears off, when the world forgets the headlines, I need to know you'll still be here." He stepped closer. Their hands touched, then rested, warm, still, connected. Lucas whispered, "Then let me stay." A soft moment passed. Then Clara stepped back and reached for the front door. She opened it, not to leave, but to let him in, fully. "If you stay tonight," she said, voice gentle, "you're staying for real. No more halves, no more hiding." Lucas looked at her and didn't move. His silence, long, too long, filled the space. And Clara suddenly misread it. Her face fell just slightly. Not with anger, but with old grief, the kind you carry from every time someone walked away just before they meant it. "I understand," she said softly, then started to close the door. Lucas didn't speak, not for a long breath, not while the door stood half open, and Clara stood half broken. But then he stepped forward and did something he hadn't done since the day they met. He put down his phone, his keys, his wallet, everything that defined him in the world outside, and stepped inside. Clara closed the door behind him, softly. He stood in the middle of her living room, not the CEO, not the press figure, not the board's golden boy. Just a man. She looked at him. Why now? Lucas stepped toward her, slow and certain, because for the first time in my life, I don't care who's watching. They sat on the old couch, the one with a permanent dip on one side and a stitch on the armrest from where June once spilled tomato soup. No titles. No scripts, just honesty. "I built my life on control," Lucas said, "on making sure nothing and no one could shake it. But then you walked in, not loud, not demanding, and suddenly everything I thought I wanted started to feel quiet." Clara's eyes shimmered. "But quiet's good, isn't it?" she whispered. Lucas nodded. "It's the kind of quiet that feels like home." She smiled, soft, knowing. "You terrify me," she admitted. He chuckled. "You humble me." The board met the next day, not because of a scandal, but to address a resignation. Beatrice's. It wasn't loud, there were no leaks, but behind closed doors, key staff had come forward, emails, timelines, quiet testimonies about a pattern of manipulation and division. Beatrice left with her head high, but not untouched. Clara? She didn't gloat, she didn't speak. She stayed in her seat, calm, graceful, whole. Because justice, when it arrives with dignity, doesn't need to shout. 1 week later, at the company's autumn charity gala, Lucas stood beside Clara. No announcements, no dramatic kiss. But he offered her his arm in front of 200 people, clients, staff, board members, and media alike. And she took it. The whispers came, but no one dared question it out loud. Because when they looked at her, hair pinned back, soft silk gown, locket resting at the base of her throat, they didn't see a scandal. They saw a woman who had been through fire and walked out without smoke. Back in the office that Monday, a young intern knocked on Clara's open door. "Miss Whitmore?" Clara looked up. "Yes?" "I just wanted to say, you make me believe I can survive this place." Clara blinked. The girl smiled nervously and turned to leave. But Clara called after her, "Would you like to sit in on this morning's strategy call?" The girl lit up. "Yes, I'd love that." That night, Lucas and Clara walked home together. Quiet streets, no cameras, just them. At the door to her building she turned. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the locket, and this time it wasn't closed. Inside, a new slip of paper. She unfolded it. "This is not about saving you, it's about loving you with my eyes open." She looked up, tears welling. "I want you to keep it," he said, "but only if you believe it's true." She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around his waist, and rested her head on his chest. "I've never believed anything more." As they turned to go inside, Clara whispered, almost like a memory returning, "Don't say anything," she whispered, echoing that morning. But now with peace instead of fear. And Lucas, smiling, replied, "I don't have to." Clara never wanted to wear white, not because she didn't believe in love, but because for a long time she thought love didn't believe in her. But that morning, with her hair pinned in a simple bun, flat shoes, and a dress that made no promises beyond elegance, she looked at herself in the mirror and smiled. She saw herself, whole, for the first time. In the next room, Lucas was adjusting the cuff of his navy blue shirt, the one Clara said matched the way he got serious when he tried to hide being nervous. It was at the courthouse, just like she wanted. 12 people, a beautiful hush, soft laughter. June held the flowers, Marta smiled from the back. The officiant spoke in a calm, steady voice. Lucas didn't give a speech. He simply said, "I'm not promising to protect you from the world. I'm promising to walk with you, even when the world feels like too much." Clara didn't cry, but she gripped his hand so tightly that he knew. She had been saying yes long before that day. They went home by subway. Yes, subway. It was Friday. The sky was overcast, and Lucas, the CEO, had taken off his jacket, loosened his tie, and offered his shoulder for her to lean on. On Clara's lap, the locket, open, with no paper inside, because now there was nothing left to hide. At their doorstep, before going inside, Lucas held her face in both hands. "You still sure about this?" he teased. Clara smiled. "No," she said. "I'm sure about you." And they walked in together, not as promises, but as two lives that finally knew exactly where they were going. The end. Weeks later, their story was no longer headlines, just a quiet kind of happiness. Sometimes the strongest women aren't the loudest in the room. They're the ones who survive quietly, love deeply, and fight for their dignity without ever asking for applause. Clara didn't want power. She wanted peace. And in the end, she got both. What about you? What would you have done in Clara's place? Would you have stepped away to protect him, or made him choose you publicly? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below, rate this story from 0 to 10 and tell me, do you believe in second chances? And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember. Love doesn't make you weak. It makes you seen. See you in the next story.